أهلا وسهلا بالجميع، حياكم الله في الجلسة الرابعة من جلسات منتدى الاستشاريين الإداريين السعوديين الأول. هذه الجلسة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية بإذن الله، وسوف تكون عن كيف تصمم النموذج المالي. في هذه الجلسة سيكون معنا الأستاذ فوزي حموشي من إمكان التعليمية. أهلا وسهلا أستاذ فوزي.
أهلا وسهلا.
وسيكون معكم فريق إمكان أيضا كداعمين لأي مشاكل أو أسئلة أو استفسارات. شاركونا تعليقاتكم وأسئلتكم في مربع النص الموجود تحت فيديو البث المباشر. أهلا وسهلا أستاذ فوزي، تفضل.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome at the second day of the SAMCA conference. I have the pleasure actually to guide you through financial modeling, which is a very important aspect in consulting, but also in any business in the kingdom. So inshallah, today we will have a deep dive into an existing case study of MCAN. If we go to the next slide, I will shortly introduce my team. So Doreen, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Yes. So inshallah, so we're part of MCAN. My name is Fawzi Hamouchi, Senior Manager at MCAN. I'm working at MCAN for 8 years, and I've been working on many different business case and financial modeling because it is the key component for any existing or new projects. So it will decide what the project will be about and if it's feasible. With me, there are also two co-facilitators, so Shahad and Doreen, and inshallah, they will play a role when we do an interactive session. So throughout this presentation, we will also ask you to scan a QR code. So there are certain topics that we want to ask your opinion on it, inshallah. If we continue. So actually, the main goals for this session is not for you to become a financial expert, but at least to understand what financial modeling is about. So today's goals are related to understanding the relevance of financial modeling in consulting, but also to illustrate the full process of financial modeling, and then finally also gain hands-on experience through a practical project case. So this is based on an existing project. So if we go to the next slide, please. So before we start the presentation and the exercises, so we would like to ask you to have your mobile phone in your hands, and then once we come to it, you can scan one time the QR code, and there will be a few questions that will be asked. But each time we will include the QR code, and my team will also make sure, in case you're not logging in through your phone, that there will be a link in the chat sent where you can open actually the link. If we continue to the next slide. Okay, so today's agenda. So first, let's start with an introduction. So what is the definition and purpose of financial modeling? And we're going to introduce also the financial modeling framework developed and utilized by MCAN in various projects. And then inshallah, we deep dive into a case study. So this case study will be about a K-12 school that is focused on arts. So it's a very niche market. K-12, K stands actually for kindergarten, and 12 is actually grade 12. Within the case study, we go through the framework. Part of the framework is to start with project formulation and direction, then defining the scenarios, identifying the cost and revenue drivers and what are the assumptions related to it, modeling and testing, sensitivity analysis, and then finally output and reporting. Okay, so let's start with the first chapter. So what is financial modeling? So financial modeling, as what you can see on the slide, is the systematic approach of creating a comprehensive mathematical representation of a company based on financial planning and performance. So it is current driven, but also we're going to use a lot of projections. that will be mainly developed in an Excel sheet, but the reporting usually in the consulting world will happen on PowerPoint, and usually you're reporting to the board of directors, or at least the leadership team of the company, including their investors. So this involves crafting assumptions and employing different formulas and techniques. So we're gonna tackle that as well. It has to be a dynamic model. In other words, it is something that will be flexible, so that you will be able to adapt the model to simulate as much as possible of the real context, analyzing, but also forecasting the company's financial future. Why is financial modeling important? Because it's a powerful tool in any project to determine, is the project feasible? So the client might have an idea, but we have to test it. Does it make sense when we look at the projections of the project? It will also provide you input on how to plan and design strategy and operations. And we will go into that, inshallah. And then finally, you always have to utilize different scenarios, which are based on business and financial scenarios. We can go to the next, Doreen. This is the first exercise. So if you can kindly take your phone and scan the QR codes, and we would like you to type in your answers. So the first question that we can start with is, why do you think financial modeling is important in consulting? So we will give you maybe 10 seconds, and then we're going to look at the answers, inshallah. So I see 3 answers. So I'm just waiting maybe 10 seconds. And in the meantime, I will talk through the answers. So the first one, decision making, that is definitely the case. So it is about a decision whether a project is feasible, but also a decision whether a project needs to be amended, and if yes, how. And you can reflect that then together with the client. To ensure effective allocation of resources and inform proper decision making, definitely. So we know that one of the biggest cost component of a school is staffing. So that will definitely play a role. It's usually 60 to 70% of the revenues are going actually to staffing. So I see a lot of answers, so I will just highlight a few. Support the right business model selection. That will be definitely a case, and we will get back to it. So what are the different business models that we took in our case study? Resource allocation, decision making multiple times, to help evaluate a project, defining the quality and time needed for the project. That will be definitely playing a role, because as we know, for schools, it might take 3 to 4 years to even be at a break-even point. So that will be impacted by, for instance, your students' growth within the school. So thank you, Doreen. And now I want to go back to the presentation. So thank you very much for the answers. And I think each exercise, I will highlight a few of those answers, but it was definitely the answers we were looking for. So if we go to the next slide, please. So in here, it's actually defined what is the purpose of financial modeling and the importance in consulting. So the first point, we talked about it, I saw it also in the answers. It's about project opportunity assessment and feasibility. So it assists the clients from his idea, whether it's applicable or not. And we're gonna look at it from a financial perspective. So whether it's about entering a new market or establishing a new venture, launching a new product and service within an existing company, or restructuring some of the operations. And then the financial modeling is actually a quantitative basis for evaluating the options. One of the other ways to utilize financial modeling is also to look at performance improvement. So financial modeling is actually relevant for existing projects, but also new projects. So based on the financial model, you can diagnose financial performance issues. So if we see that we have high staffing costs or lower profitability rates, what can we change in the model? And as such, what will we be changing in reality to make sure that we optimize profitability? There is also a component of risk mitigation. So that is why we're using different scenarios. And some scenarios might be higher in profit, but also higher in risk, or more complex in is it actionable or not? So that is what we're trying to do also with financial modeling. Investment analysis, so evaluating potential investments. And then finally, it is really operational driven. So in financial modeling, it's not just purely a P&L. Once you go into assumptions, there is a lot of operational aspects in it that needs to be validated. So examples will be student to teacher ratios, because that will impact actually your staffing cost. So what can we do in reality to actually make sure that we get more optimal? So thank you, Doreen. And if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so what I would like to do right now is actually to introduce a financial modeling framework to build soundproof financial models. And in consulting, we always use frameworks. So this is something that MCAN has developed over the years. It is simple, but very comprehensive as well. So it consists actually of 6 items. So the first one, and that is always the starting point, which is the project formulation and direction. So align with the client on the project needs. So what do they want to do? By when? What are the goals and requirements? And determine based on that actually the financial model design. So every client might have different focus areas. So the financial model can still be customized to the needs of each client or investor. So certain clients are looking more at a profitability matrix. So that needs to be detailed more. But also there are clients that are very educational driven, and there will be a lot of assumptions about academic aspects of the model. Then the second step is, once you understand what the project is about, so they want to establish a specialist art schools in Riyadh, we start by defining the different scenarios. So look at the different business or model scenarios, and also define your high impact variables and assumptions that will drive your profitability. Once that has been identified, you go to step 3, which is about identifying the cost and revenue drivers, but also the underlying assumptions. Then after that has been concluded, you're gonna start with the modeling and testing. So you're gonna gather the data, you're gonna fill in the model, and you're gonna test the model, but also making sure that there is accuracy throughout, because the sheets will be very extensive. One small error can have a huge impact on the model. Once that has been concluded, there will be also a sensitivity analysis. So your model has been developed. There is a number coming out, but maybe you want to increase the EBITDA or the final revenues of the project with a certain amount. What are the key drivers that needs to be changed? So there might be a finding, let's reduce the rental cost for this year. So therefore, we're gonna actually negotiate with the building owner, or let's reduce staffing costs, etc. Let's increase student to teacher ratio. So you're gonna play around with the model that allows you to obtain the final goal that you have, or final goals that you have regarding performance. And then finally, based on that, there will be output and reporting based on the different scenarios and assumptions. And based on that, you're gonna formulate also the recommendation to the client. So if we continue, so this framework, we will be utilizing it throughout the case study. So inshallah, we will take you through the step-by-step process of building a financial model using a real case study example of an MCAN project. So it's not a fiction. It was something that we have done in the past. So it will give you a great insight on how we approached it. So inshallah, let's start actually with the case study. So again, this is the overview of the framework that we have discussed. So inshallah, we will tackle each of those items. So the first item is project formulation and direction. And as I discussed it in the framework, the first point is definitely understanding the project needs from the client's perspective, but also the goals and requirements. And based on that, you're gonna actually determine the high-level financial model design. And as what I mentioned, the items are always similar, but you customize it based on the client's needs. So in certain tabs or sections, you might want to detail it even further. So part of this design is, if you go back, Doreen, part of this design is the model scope. What are the objectives? So what are you trying to derive from this model, and also intended outcomes? Who are your key stakeholders and users of the model? Because that will also impact the way that you report the findings and the language being used. What is the time horizon of the model's projection? So is it a 10-year period? Is it a 20-year period or a 25 period? It depends on which sector you are at. Normally in education, we're utilizing a 20-year period because it will take a long time actually to have full student capacity. And over time, you might want to increase that, but also in terms of rent, it's never the same number. So it will increase over time as well. And therefore, you want to see also what is happening in year 15 and not in year 10 only. And then also defining the main assumptions that will actually guide the model's calculation. So if we go to the next slide. Doreen, can we go to the next one? Yeah. So this might be what the client might tell you. They might give you all the details, or they give you very high level inputs. So this is an example of how a client can give you direction in a non-detailed way. So the client's direction was they want to open a school, a premium specialist art school in the kingdom that provides excellent arts and mainstream education. So from here, you can get a few findings. First of all, it has to be in the kingdom. Secondly, it is a niche. So it is a premium specialist art school. And thirdly, I can also see some assumptions about revenues. So it's a revenue. So it's on the premium side of the market. And then below, they provided some goals that they have with the school. So it has to be world-class offerings in arts education. It has to provide higher learning pathways in the arts, provide opportunities for cultural exchange, and also prepare students for careers in cultural industries. Even though this is all text, it will be all reflected in your financial model. So think about when you hear the word premium, once you do the benchmarking, it will impact the level of tuitions that you set in the model. If there is something about world class, it's a very premium school. If there is cultural exchange, you have to factor in some extracurricular activities that is dealing with cultural exchange, etc. So this is the high level of the direction. And then I would like to continue with another question is what inputs will you require from the client to be able to build a financial model for the school? So what other things would you ask if you just knew the slide before? What are the other aspects that you will still include? So also for this one, maybe 20 seconds to fill in the answer, and then I will also guide you through the answers. a very good answer. What grade levels will we begin with? And that is also usually that you as consultant will advise. We will get back actually to that point, but it's a key driver and key component in the model itself. And actually, if the client has an indication of we want to start with the lower grades first, that has to be actually reflected in the model. So that is a really good point. Budget, size of business, time frame required. Yeah, I like the word budget. So what is the total investments that they actually can afford? And therefore your model will allow for that. Tuition fees and structure. That is something that the client can provide to you as well. And what we are doing as consultants is we're testing it. So from the previous slide, we know that they want to enter in the premium space. We can know from benchmarking what are the ranges. And it will be also great if the client provides you with a certain range. We're gonna test it based on actually what is required in the data. Excellent. Inflation will be also part of the modeling, and I think that is something that the consultants will do, and not specifically from the client. Number of schools and students, definitely. That is actually the biggest driver. So how big is your school? How much is the operational cost? That is something that the consultant will advise. Target location of a school is something that you actually want to ask from the client. Okay, the capital and expected profits, excellent. So what I can see actually in the answer options, there is a bit that actually needs to come from the client, and there is a bit that we actually provide as a recommendation based on our modeling. Either way, we always test it. So when the client says we want to open K-12 to grade 9, we might end up saying like, we would recommend you to do K-12 because of these reasons. If we will rent or buy land, excellent. So thank you very much for the answers. Mashallah, I think you are already financial experts. So let's go back to the presentation. Okay. So this is an example of a little bit more of a detailed direction from the client. So in all of these aspects, think already on how to integrate that in the financial modeling. So for instance, we sat down with the client and asked them about the gender of the school. Is it just male or female, or is it both? Also the grades. So K-12, also we discussed initially what should be the ramp up. We looked also at the school operator profile. So it is very clear that they want to be a high quality premium educational provider, and they are actually targeting a niche within K-12. That is a school that is focusing on arts and culture. Partnerships. So what are the different partnerships? So whether it's in the investment space or whether it is as an operator, because that will impact your financial modeling. Because if it's a co-investor, your profitability will be actually according the investment size, but also your expenses will be, your investment expenses will be divided amongst both. But if you're working, for instance, with an academic operator, in the P&L, there will be also an item that is actually an expense to that operator. Different licenses, so each license might have their own price. What is the location? Is it in Jeddah or in Riyadh? If it's in another city, it will impact actually your capex investment, but also your rents. And we know that Riyadh might be more expensive than any other cities in Saudi. Tuition fees, we actually also talked a little bit more about that. Are they providing any financial support? And then the curriculum itself. And then finally, one of the key components is actually your school launch. when are you looking to launch the school. That will impact the model significantly, but it will also determine which business case or market entry approach you have to follow. If you have to launch very quickly, and greenfield approach, which we will be discussing later, might be very challenging. Yes, so this is an overview of maybe some initial additional questions that you can ask the client to build your model. If we go to the next slide. Okay, so in this second aspect of the financial modeling framework, we're gonna actually define the scenarios. So what are the various business model scenarios that the model will explore, define the different variables and factors that will change in each scenario, and always consider a best case, worst case, and base case scenario, because sometimes a financial model might lead to the highest profitability. It doesn't mean that it's very actionable. So in our case, we actually defined or identified the different scenarios that we can have. So we looked at three factors. We looked at the building state, we looked at the market, and we looked at the ramp up. And each scenario will have a major difference. So for the building state, what we're meaning is when you open a school, it can be through two approaches. It can be a greenfield approach, meaning you're gonna work together with partners, you identify a plot of land, you're gonna construct it, and then you customize the building, and you will launch the school. There are pros and advantages to this approach. One of the biggest pro is that you can really customize your building, but you can also select the location. One of the cons are definitely an increase in risk. There is a more requirement on partnerships and CapEx investments, but also the timelines. If the client wants to open a school within a year, a greenfield approach is not doable. The other approach is actually a brownfield. So what you can do there is to rent an existing building. So if it's a vacant education facility, you can rent it, and there might be still investments required because you still want to customize it to an extent, which is usually done by additional refurbishment and furnishing as well. So that's the first scenario. So you can play around whether it's a greenfield or a brownfield approach. For the second one, it's really about the market. So this is the revenue driver. So are you charging a premium fee that might start between 45 until 75? Or are you aiming for a premium plus market, which might start from 47 to 85? So that is one other scenario that we can play around. And then finally, we can play around as well with the ramp up of the number of students and the number of grades. So are we doing a slow ramp up or are we doing a fast ramp up? And in reality, it's not that we always can choose for fast ramp up because it has a higher profitability rate. We always have to look at the implications on operations and on is it achievable? And if yes, what do we need to put in operations? So this is just a nutshell about the different scenarios. If we go to the next slide. So based on these items, so based on the building state, market, and ramp up, and for each one we have two options, you will be ending up with 8 scenarios. There are also projects where you can focus specifically on a business case, on a best case and worst case scenario. On a worst case scenario. But for this case, we actually took the different scenarios and we went through it actually scenario by scenario. If we go to the next slide, Doreen. So the third aspect is actually to identify the cost and revenue drivers and assumptions. So what are the main drivers of cost and revenues? You're gonna list and describe the different assumptions, and you gather historical data, but also current market data and research to support assumptions. So let's say I want to make an assumption about staff salaries, I can look in the past what I have been paying out to my staff. But you can also look at and if you don't have those data access, you can also look at the current market data research as well. So if we go to the next. Okay, so I see I have 30 minutes left. So again, this is another exercise. So if you can kindly scan the QR code or continue on the website that you already have open. So what are some key revenue and cost drivers for a school? Okay, so I like the answer. So I see tuition fees. Definitely, that is your biggest revenue driver. We're gonna talk about that as well. Salaries, usually your biggest cost driver. I see marketing fees. If you scroll down, revenues, yes, I see salaries and I see tuition fees, and those are actually the key drivers of cost and revenues. So that's exactly right. So Doreen, if we can go please back to enrollment and fees, partnerships, utilities. Yes. So if we can go back to the presentation. Okay, so in here, actually, we looked at the different assumptions. So in the revenues, and we have seen it also in your answers, you're gonna look at student tuition fees. It's by large the biggest bucket within revenues, but there are also other revenue streams. So whether it's extracurricular activities that might take up to 10 or 20% of the total revenues, but also there are registration fees and application fees for new enrolled students. So that is in light of revenues. When we look at the CapEx, which is actually your capital on land and building, so the assumptions around building construction, but also refurbishment cost. And we look also at the FFE, so the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. In terms of OPEX, which is your operational expenses, the first point that we mentioned there is staff salaries, but it has to include as well the benefits and development costs, because that will add a lot to your staffing costs. So it's more than just the base salary. Building rent is second. So you want to explore options with building rent. Then you can have a look at education program and supplies. What are any costs related to arts and culture? It can include partnerships that you have with artists or arts organizations. There is definitely a cost related to marketing and recruitment. And then the remaining, you can usually mention it as operations and other costs. And then the other assumptions will be around discount rates, and we will get back to it, and also inflation. So especially if you have a time period of 20 years, make sure that the inflation aspect has been reflected as well. If we go to the next slide. In here, we can see a little bit more details on how we tackle a revenue assumption. So at the left column, we have the different revenue categories. So we can focus now on tuition fees. What are the drivers of tuition fees or tuition fees revenues? So you're gonna have to have a look at the different tuition fee levels. You're gonna have a look at the number of students, but also sibling discounts. So you have to make assumptions about the percentage of the population of students that have a brother also enrolled in the school or a sister. And then if you go a little bit more into details, you will have to determine, so when we have the driver tuition fee levels, what are the different suitable tuition or optimal tuition level across all grade levels. And later on in the presentation, you can see how we make it, how we make the breakdown. But we know that we have different grades and we have different years over time. So there is a whole table that will actually factor that in. You have to factor in that there is opportunity for tuition increases in year 2, and then usually after each 3 years. And then there is also an assumption that we made in here, which is, for instance, 30% of students receiving a 5% sibling discount on tuition. And what are the sources that we're utilizing? Benchmarking. So benchmarking as existing schools to see what is the trend there. So benchmark their financial models, but you can also have additional discussions with experts and ISO. So in this case, ISO is International School Operator. It might be any school operator to get their findings. So the idea is for any assumptions that you're gonna detail it in this way. So for instance, the registration fees, it is about number of new enrollments. From benchmarking, we know that premium schools are charging, for instance, 4,000 riyals per student. So you will, in your model, you will have a table about new enrollments and you multiply that by 4,000. Sometimes it might change over the years, so you can reflect it in the model as well. If we go to the next slide, Doreen. So I think this is one of the most important tables that you will have when doing a K-12 school model, because it's your biggest revenue driver. So what you can see in here is, for simplicity, we took two scenarios. So the first one is a scenario where you're targeting the premium fees market, and the second scenario is about a premium plus fees. What you always have to consider is to break it down in grade level. So we started from pre-K until grade 12. We know that schools are charging in the higher grades a different tuition than in the lower grades. And what you can see in here is also a 15-year plan. So in year 1, you usually start at a lower pace to build your brand, especially if you're a new brand, but also to make sure that the operations are being set up. And over time, when you hit more maturity and you gained also more experience, you can increase the tuition. So if you really look carefully at the model, you can see there are different tuition levels per grade, but also there are certain increases over time. So if we look at pre-K in year 1, it's 45,000, but in year 2, it becomes 50,000, and it stays like that for 3 years, because in reality, you can also not increase your tuition every year. So there is a cycle included in the model in where every 3 years you're going to increase the tuition. So this is actually a really important table within the model. If we go to the next slide. Then the second component that is important in as a driver within your model is you're gonna now look at the school capacity and how do you open the grades. So what we can see in the first column or the first table is the maximum capacity of a school. So we know that the client wants to have an enrollment rate at maturity between 15 and 1,600 students. And then you have to break it down in terms of the different grades. So the two additional findings that you have to include is also number of classes per grade, but also what is the number of students per class. And you can see that the number of students per class in the higher grades, it will increase until 20. And based on that, you understand what is exactly your population within each grade level. So it's not, if you have 15 grade levels, you just divide 1,500 students by 15, and that is 100 per class. You have to include as well what is normally this number of students per class and what should be the total number of classes per grade level. The second table is talking about the other scenario where you might have a slow ramp up or a fast ramp up. So you can see that, for instance, in the slow ramp up, in your first year, you will be opening the kindergarten grades until grade 3. The second year, you're gonna open 2 more grades, and then in the next 2 years, you're gonna open the remaining grades. As in comparison with the fast ramp up, where you actually have two main openings. So in the first year, you're gonna open from KG1 until grade 5, and then in the second year, you will open actually the remaining of the grades. In reality, a fast ramp up is a very difficult scenario. So if you see the data, you might opt for the fast ramp up, but always keep in mind what are the operational considerations for it. If we go to the next slide. In here, we can actually see that we filled it in a table about based on the different openings of the grades, and also what is your enrollment percentage. So never assume that the moment you open a grade, you will have 100% utilization. So also for that one, we have been realistic by factoring in that you need time to actually fill all those seats. So we have done it for both of those scenarios. And because of time, I actually want to continue. So in the first one, you see the percentages of utilization rate. And then in the model, we also multiplied it by the number of students. So in here, we can see if we have a slow ramp up in year 14, in pre-K, we have 91 students. While it started in year 1 with 38. So there is always that organic growth. And then essentially, you can decide whether you have a fully utilized school with a wait list. In our case, we're actually factored in that might not be the case. So 95% is the full utilization. If we go to the next slide. Briefly, these are actually the assumptions regarding CapEx. So CapEx is dealing with land and building. So the first CapEx category is building construction cost. So you have to decide whether it's a greenfield or a brownfield, because we know that in greenfield, you need to construct the full building versus a brownfield. It might be only additional refurbishment. You're gonna look at the built-up area, which is the driver, but also the cost per built-up area square meter. And then as an assumption example is that, for instance, for a brownfield case, we took as an assumption 30% of your built-up area requires renovation. And we also made another assumption, which is for a premium location, refurbishment can be defined as 8,000 riyals per square meter. This is all based on quotations from premium school building designers, but also real estate companies. If we go to the next one. Okay, in here, there's also a lot of details regarding the operational expenses, of which the first two, actually this whole slide are the important factors. So the first one is you're gonna look at the staff salaries. Second one is about the building and land rent. If it's a brownfield case, is different than if it's a greenfield case. Specifically for the rent, if it's not given already, if you don't already have the building, you can still calculate or make careful assumptions regarding it. So one way to do it is, for instance, if you know that you're gonna have a brownfield case, but you don't know exactly the location or the exact building, you can still calculate or estimate the rent based on two main drivers. So what will be actually the amount per square meter per year as in terms of rent, and also what is the built-up area per student, versus if you have a greenfield. In greenfield case, you're gonna look at multiple drivers. So you're gonna include also the land area and what is actually the payback period for rent, because you have to factor that in. You have to factor that in your model. If we go to for the staffing, because I think that is the most important aspects of the OPEX, you're gonna have a look at the number of staff, and that is usually driven by your teacher to student ratio. You're gonna have a look at the benefits, so including housing, allowances, insurance, bursaries. There is also a difference if you have a percentage expats versus local staff, because for expats staffing, you usually pay a higher salary, but you also have to provide more options regarding housing, and there will be price implications on insurances. If we go to the next slide. And I think we can skip this one because of time. Okay, so maybe we can go to the next section. So this whole section was actually about identifying the drivers and assumptions. And now we are actually in the 4th stage out of those 6 stages within your business modeling process. So for modeling and testing, you're gonna develop a financial model structure, and you include inputs and output sections. So what are the items that you need to fill in and that you can amend? And we usually use a different color for that. And what are hard-coded formulas? So you only change a certain aspect of the model and not the full aspect. You're gonna build your formulas and calculations. So an example was, for instance, you're gonna factor in that every 3 years, you're gonna increase the tuition with an X amount. So you're gonna build that formula to also minimize human error. Okay, so now we're actually entering a new question. So when developing a financial model on Excel, which of the following are the key elements you need to consider? So there will be now, I think, different options, and you can select multiple options as well. Okay, I don't know if I see all the answers. So color code cells. Organize and legend the model, ready for any user. Testing. You might figure out that maybe all these items are relevant. So thank you for sharing, Doreen, and we can actually go back because of time to the presentation. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So you have seen a lot of PowerPoint slides, but in reality, you're gonna spend a lot of time in Excel. So it actually starts by having an Excel with different tabs that include, for instance, assumptions. And it might be a long page with the different assumptions. You will have to structure that. So there might be assumptions, how we bucketed it. So OPEX, and then the first item, you're gonna include, for instance, staffing. And there will be all the assumptions regarding the number of staff that you require, and also what are the salaries, etc. So actually your assumption tab is actually driving the whole model. You will have, based on that, you have financial statements with a P&L, so profit and loss. And you will include in that also the profitability, whether it's the EBITDA, whether it's the net profit margin, etc. There will be also supporting schedules or more detailed, so like student enrollment, you might include that in a separate tab, and also a dashboard or a summary. We also know that financial models are assumption driven. And the inputs and assumptions have to be updated all the time. because your environment is changing. So in the beginning, you might not have all the data points, and then you do a benchmarking and you find that this is the construction cost per square meter in Riyadh. You're gonna update it with that finding. So you can start with your initial assumptions, but the idea of the model it's that it's completed, that it's continuously updated. There should be a logical data flow, and definitely use correct formulas and references to different cells and tabs across the sheet. And it's also important to differentiate between inputs. So what are the hard-coded cells? What are you not touching? Versus the soft-coded cells that you need to change. And we always use a different color. In our case, it's the blue color because it's a neutral color. And we're using the red colors if we want to identify something that is at a loss or at a risk, versus green one that is something more positive. So that is something that you can decide. If we can go to the next. Sensitivity analysis. So once you have built your model, you have the Excel, you have the different assumptions. You actually want to play with the different assumptions and variables to check the profitability analysis or sensitivity. So what you want to do is to evaluate the impact of changes on financial income, but also assess the level of risk associated with variations in assumptions. We discussed a little bit about a fast ramp up. There are risks associated with it. So can we still have a good business case when we have a slower ramp up, or maybe in between? So that is actually what sensitivity analysis allows you to do. So I think another question is, does reviewing your assumption due to uncertainty weaken your assessment? So if we can fill this in. Okay, because of time's sake, and I saw the answer no, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, this is actually more an illustration on how we do the sensitivity. So there are actually your key driver assumptions. They will be that will be your starting point. But then you want to test the alternatives. So what will happen if you set the a higher tuition rate? Will you become more profitable? Or maybe the client will say, maybe this tuition rate is actually too high. We want to lower it. What will be the impact? And if we lower it, how can we achieve still a certain profitability? So you're gonna play around with certain factors, and then essentially your profitability, what will be the impact on profitability? So there might be a client having a clear definition that my profitability rate should be 25%. So you're gonna play around with the different assumptions, but also if this assumption doesn't work, what should be the alternative? So if we go actually to the next slides. Okay, so this is the final aspect of it. So you have built your model, you have identified the different revenue and revenue drivers and cost drivers, you have identified the different scenarios. The bulk of your time goes into assumptions, so validating the assumptions in a continuous way through different sources. And then based on that, you actually test the model in terms of accuracy. You do the sensitivity analysis, so playing around to have the most optimal model for the client that is based on his needs, but also based on what the market is actually demanding. And now we're at the final stage where you do output and reporting. So you will not present actually the Excel to your client. You will do it in PowerPoint or any other visual communication tool. And you tailor the reporting also based on the different stakeholders. So if you meet with the CFO, you might have a more detailed approach than if it's with the board of directors. or if it's with the management team, etc. And what you want to do is actually your full model, you actually want to present it in a way that they can understand it by seeing the slides alone without going through a detailed Excel. So if we go to the next slides, and I think I have just a few minutes left. So there are different ratios to consider. Okay, so I heard that my time is up, but very quickly, Ada, if you allow me. So operational ratios, you're going to look at revenue per student, for instance, profitability ratios, EBITDA margins, and net profit. You will hear that a lot. Investment appraisal, you're going to look at IRR, MPV, payback period, etc. If we continue to the next slides, so there are a lot of ratios to consider. This is a breakdown of each. If we continue, so knowing all these different ratios, actually in the next slides, it's an example on how you can report it in a very visual and easy to understand way. So if we go next. So this is, for instance, an example on how we included actually 4 different scenarios, and we focused on 4 or 5 ratios. So you can easily compare it as well. So we can see, for instance, in if we go back to the previous slide, you can see, for instance, in business case scenario 1, we have an EBITDA of 18.8 million versus in at year 10 versus in business case scenario 4, we have 24.6. So the client might already indicate, I want to focus on this scenario and how can we make it happen operational. So if we go to the next slide, and I think my time is up. So this is comparing it also. You can use bars, but you can also use lines. And in here, you can easily actually compare different years, and you can compare different scenarios as well. So this is one way to visualize the data. If we go next. I think I will skip this question so we can go to the conclusion. So we have discussed the full framework. We know that numbers are important, but the other disclaimer I want to make is, yes, we're gonna look whether it's financial attractive, but it's not only a number-based approach. You have to look at it as well. Is it operational feasible? And scenarios have their different risks and also operational implications. And then based on this holistic view, where you look at the project feasibility, but you also look at the operational implications and also how achievable it is and what are the risks associated, that all together will give you actually an idea to follow a certain business case scenario. I think it was a challenge to go through a financial case in an hour, but I hope that I provide at least an understanding on how to approach it. And I really hope that that you will have an opportunity to work on a financial modeling. You will be spending a lot of hours in Excel, but you will be learning a lot, and it will impact actually any business decision. So I think because of time, I would like to thank everyone attending this session. I think there is now also another session about benchmarking. So good luck, and I really wish you the best in your future journey, inshallah.
Thank you, Fawzi, and thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the next session within 2 minutes. Thank you, Fawzi.
Yeah, you're welcome.